Bonjour, namaste, shalom. We are here today to discuss Air Commodore Nitin Sathe's book, 1971-1999, War Stories, published by Vitasta. The book discusses interesting stories, interesting episodes from India's wars in 1971 and 1999 with Pakistan. Thank you, Air Commodore Sathe, for agreeing to our interview today. In terms of structure, I will start by asking some questions. If the audience has any questions, we welcome your questions, your concerns. Please feel free to raise your hand. You can use the Zoom function to raise your hand, or you can just wave and we will unmute you to ask questions. Unless you have any questions, please stay on mute so that we can have an uninterrupted discussion. With that, let's get started. So when we do these interviews, the first question we ask is, what is a 30 to 40 second elevator pitch of your book? How would you describe it to someone who has not read it yet, or perhaps not even heard of it before?
Well, firstly, good evening to everybody else, and good morning in the US to everybody there. And nice to be with you, Mr. Vishal Gupta. You see, elevator pitch, what is war all about? When the civilians, the normal public, what they feel about war is bullets flying and people dying and all that all the time. And although it is that to a large extent, but there are human beings, fighting the war, and there are minds there who are interacting with each other and across. So what I have tried to do in my book is to get the human and the humane aspects of war from people who have actually been there and done that. And so my stories actually revolve around the guys who actually were there on the spot. They saw things for themselves, what they felt about the enemy, what they felt about their own people dying. So those are the kind of things that I brought out in this book, which I felt was different than what normal history books are all about. People kind of, write who was where, what happened, how many bombs were fired, and how many aircraft were lost. Those kind of historical, yes, those kind of things I didn't include in my book. I just showed the human and the human aspects.
Okay. And what motivated you to write a book about India's war history? There's so many people.
You see, we were going through the 50th year of the 1971 war, and my best friend in readup.com, he's the editor-in-chief, he asked me to do a weekly story on the 71 war by interviewing people. So what I did was I started from my father. My father was in the Mukti Vahini, and he entered East Pakistan in May of 1971. And he had some stories to tell us about what he saw and what he felt before the war and after, of course, after that. So whatever little I had memories of in those times, I started with that story. And it was liked by people. And then I went on to, contact Daddy's friends and their friends, and then came across a large number of people who wanted to tell their stories, which had never been recorded. So I did that, and I started writing this book. It took almost a year to write all these stories. And towards the end of the 50th year, I also realized that there's a different kind of war that we fought in 1999. It was a Kargil conflict. It was hardly a war. It was a one-sided affair. It was fought only on our side. And so therefore, I kind of thought I will add on to those stories and make it a little different. So I added on the Kargil stories to the book, and that's how we got 1971, 1999.
So I'm going to take a little detour here, because when I read the book, and one of the things I found most fascinating was this idea that your father was in the Mukti Vahini. So most people think of Mukti Vahini as, the Sheikh and his sort of Bangladesh people, but you're saying there were Indians in the Mukti Vahini too.
Well, what happened was a large number of Bengalis from East Pakistan fled to India across the Agartala border. and they were welcomed into India on that side. And then there were 10 training camps set up by the Indian Army all along the eastern border of Pakistan, rather western border of Pakistan, East Pakistan. And these training camps were run by brigadier level officers who trained these guys to fight the Pakistani armies, the outrage that they were doing in East Pakistan. So they was trained for 3 months and then sent back into Pakistan. And that's how the Mukti Vahini came into being, actually. So the tacit help that was given to them, of course, the white paper is out now, and we can read about it, how the Indian government helped, because we couldn't really handle the kind of refugees that were coming in. And so we had to do something about, getting them back and getting some normalcy in East Pakistan, whether it be, getting government to run it or breaking away East Pakistan into Bangladesh. So that was what was happening in Mukti Vahini. There are a lot of stories about this, how the training was done, which I have included in my book, which will come to a little later.
Right. Okay. So in terms of the book, what are 3 to 4 things you would want people to learn from your book? I mean, all the stories are interesting, but what's the 3, 4 specific things you want people to pick up from the book?
Well, if I can think correctly at this point, one is about resilience. How an armed forces person is, kind of trained to be resilient. That is one. Second is the ability to motivate, the ability to adjust to new surroundings, to new, inputs coming into you all the time. And of course, then innovations that take place after that. So thinking on your feet is the other thing that I would tell people about in these stories. And of course, soldiers, people think that soldiers are meant to die, but they're not meant to die for their country. They're meant to make the other person die for his country. So this is the third thing that I thought I would put across in plain language to people who really don't know much about how wars are fought.
Yeah, on that note, this idea that many people don't know how wars are fought. Tell me this. In India, we don't have a very deep tradition of books on war stories. Do you agree with that? And if yes, why do you think that is the case?
War stories have been recorded, but our history, the way we record our history, especially in the armed forces, it is not so very good. Firstly, we armed forces are so secretive about letting out plans and things after the event is over. It takes a long time for stories to come out, and with passage of time, a large amount of details, we lose out on the details, and so therefore historians also are at a flux as to what they need to write and what they need to really bring out correct stuff for people to read. So yes, India, we really don't record it very well like the Americans do. The Iraq war was recorded on a day-to-day basis, and you could see what was happening on ground sitting in your bedrooms. So that was what actually happened. The transformation over time took place between 71 and 99, when in 99, to some extent, we allowed the reporters to be there. We allowed some reportage to take place from the icy heights. And so we had the Barkhadats and everybody else coming in and giving out stories on TV. So yes, it has changed over time, but I think there's a lot more that needs to be done.
A lot more that needs to be done, you mean officially by the armed forces, by the government, or even by the
government? Yes, by the government. The government needs to actually encourage people to write about these things, and then save this history as, kind of give their stamp of approval that this is what it is. Because every time you've seen in other things also in our country, a government changes, history also changes a little bit, and certain other aspects are added and certain things are taken out. So the books, actually, the history needs to be recorded correctly for the future generations to read and get some get some lessons out of it.
So on that note, let me ask you this. A young person, 18, 19, 17, 16, 15, who spends most of their day on the phone, they might say, well, why do I care about history? Why should I care? What would you say to them about history in terms of war history?
I do agree to a certain extent, because especially in countries like ours, where people are kind of gunning to do something and get to something, and they've got their aims and goals set for themselves to earn more money or get into business or whatever. There is no time. There is no time that people have to really go into history. But what I would tell them is that if you don't learn from there are a whole lot of things that you can learn from our history. And so those things, if you are better aware of things, how things pan out, you will be a better person, one, and you will be able to deal with life situations a little better. So this is what I feel about youngsters reading up on a little bit of history.
Okay. And do you think most ex-servicemen do a good job of teaching their next generation about war history of India?
No, not really. We don't. Having been in the armed forces for 36 years, 35 and a half years, in fact, we never spoke about. It was some things were passed generation to generation by word of mouth. They were not kind of transcribed or you put into on paper and saved up. A few things were, but a large number of things were over time, kind of forgotten. And so therefore, what I feel is that, the Indian, sorry, I just got a little, this thing. What are the questions, please? Sorry.
So the question is, you talked about sort of the importance of learning about and from history.
Yeah.
And my question was, do you think most people from the armed forces do a good job of communicating the war history to their own younger family members, sons, daughters, grandchildren? So
I for one, when I went through these 35 years, I never discussed anything that was happening in office or what I was going through at home. Today, of course, I do, because I feel that I'm teaching a young set of people, 90 odd boys here, who I teach about armed forces and motivate them to join armed forces. So therefore, I make it a point to tell them little stories about whatever I've learned in life. But I'm sorry, I have also been guilty of not passing down to my youngsters when I was young enough. Yes, we don't do that.
And you think that should change?
Yes, I think it should. We must be able to speak about whatever. I mean, we try to, kind of dwell on the positives only, and the victory and what happened. But in every war, even in 71, there were so many things that could have been done differently. There were so many negative stories that were there. We try to brush them under the carpet and say, that's not to be discussed. Let's only discuss how we won the war and how Bangladesh was born and all those kind of things. So I think we should also look at our mistakes done. We should, like Kargil also, there were a whole lot of things, intelligence failures and a whole lot of things that could have been better. And we could have done a much better job of it. I think there is a need for everybody to know those things also.
So in a few minutes, I'll ask you about what are things we could have done or things that we didn't do well and could have done better. But before I get to that, what is your most favorite story in this book?
My most favorite story. There are two stories that one is in the Kargil side part of the book, and one is in the 71. The 71 story is about how the Bangladesh Air Force was born. Bangladesh Air Force was born out of 3 aircrafts. One was presented by the Maharaja of Jodhpur, a Dakota. One Chetak aircraft was given by the Indian Air Force, and one Otter aircraft was given by the Indian Air Force. There were 3 aeroplanes that were given by the Indians to the pilots who ran across to our side. They came across, and we trained the Pakistani pilots on our aircraft and made them fly these new machines. For them, they were new. Some of them were flying civil airlines, some of them were flying fighters. So some fighter pilots were converted into helicopter pilots, all those kind of things. So that whole thing was called Kilo Flight. The 7-8 gentlemen who came across, it was called Kilo Flight. And the the part of the story that I always mention when I talk to people is that the first bullets of the war, before Mrs. Indira Gandhi went on air and declared war, were fired by Pakistani pilots firing from Indian aircraft on their own homeland. That's how the war started in Bangladesh on the other side. Of course, the Pakistanis had taken charge of the situation in the west. They had bombed our 7 airfields a day prior. But on the 3rd of December at midnight, almost close to midnight, that is the time when these one Otter fitted with rockets and Chetak aircraft, one Chetak small little beetle of a helicopter, which never had fired ever before, how they modified it and made it fire rockets into Pakistani territory on fuel dumps and set them ablaze. So that's one very interesting story of the 71, which I'm quite fond of.
And you do mention that story in the book.
Sorry?
That story is mentioned in the book.
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
yes,
just want to make sure.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, the other one is about Kargil, when one of the fighter pilots, he says he talks about who fights the war actually. He says the war is also fought by the families who are staying behind, his son, his wife. So he writes a little, in the end, he sends me a mail and tells me about what it is for the wife to wait for the husband who goes on a mission, and she knows that he might not come back. So what all goes through her mind, and what are the human and humane aspects that she goes through. So that is one of the stories which I felt was very touching. What he told me about how the families were there and how they were constant pillars of support for these boys who were actually in the war zone.
Okay. And as you were researching this book, were there any stories that you learned but did not make it to the book?
Oh, there are so many of them. Actually, a large amount of editing was done to keep the page count, the word count to the correct. They didn't want it too fat book. Other than that, of course, I missed out. I picked up 2 or 3 good stories from the Indian Navy. Unfortunately, they were incomplete in the sense that I wanted to interview some more people and get some more aspects of, our only aircraft carrier that time was in the towards the East Pakistan side in the Bay of Bengal. And what all happened from that, there was a pilot who spoke to me about how they trained and how they went and attacked Chittagong. So that part of the naval part of the story on the east and the west, I got 2 stories from there which I didn't include in the book, but I plan to do that later in the next one, hopefully.
Can you give our audience a little preview of one of those stories? Maybe the one you just mentioned.
It was about how there were these aircraft which were real vintage aircraft which were being flown on the Vikrant at that point in time, and how they were trained, what kind of jugaad that was happening, how they were modifying things to suit the war requirements, how there was fratricide. Our own guys who came across boats, our own naval boats, they could not identify them, so certain shots were fired at our own navy by mistake. And of course, there was some little stories like this which I got to know.
Okay. And do you think that India's war history is adequately covered in the curriculum of the institutions that prepare the next generation of soldiers for the army, officers, such as maybe IMA, NDA?
Well, NDA, not much. I was the director training at the NDA, and at that point in time, we didn't have much of history that will be covered. In the olden times, we used to learn about the Second World War, the Rommels, and the all those kind of Second World War stories, the Battle of Britain and the Iran-Iraq, the Syrian conflict, and all those kind of things we were made to learn. But now, I think the time has come for us to also examine our own wars a little more closely, especially in training institutions where the learning values will be much higher. And so therefore, they are being discussed. But again, like I said, we need to get people to understand the negatives also. So those aspects, I think they need to be covered a little better in our training institutions.
Okay. So if you were director training at NDA, I mean, then was it not something that could have been started to address in terms of covering history?
No, well, the cadet is at a very young age over there. We are actually first molding him into being a soldier. Just the basics are being done. So it's more into physical activities, more into knowing what a weapon is, and there's a whole lot of academics that needs to be covered. We are doing a graduate course there. So there is absolutely the boy is absolutely morning to night. He is kind of busy just training that basic elements that are required to be trained. Thereafter, of course, at IMA and all, it is possible for some military history to be taught, and it is taught at IMA and the Air Force Academy. But yes, less. And as you go along in service, when you do higher courses, then you get to know more of history.
Okay. There is a question for Dr. Shweta Chandra. Dr. Chandra, would you like to ask it on camera? Shweta ji, would you like to ask your question on camera? We'll wait to see if she is willing to ask on camera. In the meantime, let me ask you this. On page 104 of the book, you write that if, and I quote, if it hadn't been for General Sagat and Group Captain Chandan Singh, the outcome of the 1971 war would have been very different. Can you explain this to our audience?
This is another very interesting story. Group Captain Chandan Singh was the commander of Jorat, and he was entrusted with looking after all the transport and helicopter operations in the eastern sector. Okay, so that was over and above his job as the boss of the Jorat airfield that he was the boss of. So well before the war started and when the initial orders were given, there was never a discussion on whether the Indian Army would get into Dhaka. Even the Chief of Army Staff, General Manekshaw, had not given any orders for the army to march into Dhaka, right? But what Chandan Singh and General Sagat, who was the corps commander of 4 Corps, which was the other side, attacking from the eastern front of from the eastern side into East Pakistan, and they are the ones who actually thought well ahead of their time, and they thought that in case we are able to transport our army guys across the Meghna River, then getting into Dhaka and threatening Dhaka would become a possibility, whereby we would be able to stop the war in time by threatening East Pakistan, the whole the command and control center of East Pakistan at Dhaka. So they thought well in time, well in advance, and then they trained the helicopter units to kind of be ready for these special heliborne operations, which involves flying with men and material at night and during day across into enemy territory, landing on unprepared grounds, dropping these guys in quick time and heading back into our own territory. So a large amount of loads were taken across this way, and the Gurkhas and a whole lot of army which went inside Bangladesh by air and were deployed inside Bangladesh across the Meghna River. So that is, and the first shots into Dhaka by the artillery were actually fired by guns which were dropped by our helicopters across the Meghna. So the end of the war in 13 days was largely because of this planning that was done by General Sagat, who was the 4 Corps commander, and Captain Chandan Singh.
Okay, and most people sort of don't realize this, but you sort of hint at this in the book, and of course history has recorded this, that in terms of the 1971 war, India and the US were on opposite sides in many ways.
Oh, yeah.
So could you maybe give our audience a little preview of that? Like most people don't realize that sort of geostrategic difference.
You see, the 7th Fleet was coming out of from the south, and they were well far away, and they actually the Indians thought that they would turn right across the Malacca Straits, come inside the Indian Ocean region, and turn right towards the Chittagong area, that is the East Pakistan area, to give support to the shipping that was going on, taking the war waging machinery as well as material into East Pakistan by the way of sea. So this kind of a blockade kind of a thing, where the Indian Navy was already doing that, stopping the ships from getting into the Chittagong harbor. The Indians thought that they would be doing that. And at that point in time, in any case, Pakistan was very good friends with the US, and they were hoping that the 7th Fleet comes in and kind of helps them out. But whatever little I have read, I'm not much of a historian, but whatever little I have read, the 7th Fleet never kind of turned towards the right. They just carried on south of the Sri Lankan waters and carried on away from the area. The reactions, of course, of the world were that, the 7th Fleet is coming in. The Russians also reacted. They were also planning to send their aircraft carriers and all that. So maybe, as a show of force and kind of signaling that happens by use of such, such things in war by other countries to stop people from fighting. Yes, maybe it achieved some aim, but I don't think 7th Fleet had much to do as far as these 1971 wars concerned.
And do you think the 7th Fleet didn't get involved despite sort of what was going on at the upper echelon of American establishment, Richard Nixon, Henry Kissinger? It didn't get involved because of the presence of the Russian warship?
People do like to believe that, but I have not really come across, solid, write-up on this myself. I have tried to get into this, but I really don't know whether it was because of the Russians that the Americans didn't venture into the Indian Ocean region. But I think somebody from the US must write about this and bring out what happened, what was the correct story. Maybe we might have to get the correct story from them.
There is a recent book in the US about this whole Cyclone Bhola and the US and the Bangladeshi War of Independence. I will share the name of the book with you later, and it's worth reading. It's very well written, but I'll share it. But let's move to the next story. On page 185 of your book, you mention a mission where Chief of the Air Staff, Air Chief Marshal A.Y. Tipnis, got, and I quote you, first-hand experience of the attack. Is it usual for an Air Chief Marshal to be part of the crew in a mission during war?
No, not really. You see, this is not an action. This was not a real war that was being fought. This was our aircraft were being used against the Pakistani intruders on our own side of the border. So there was no intervention as such. There was no air-to-air combat. There was a likelihood of an air-to-air combat, but it never took place as far as the India versus Pakistan air forces are concerned. Because we stayed on our side of the border, they stayed on their side of the border. So there was no interactions as such during this war. This particular mission that he went for was that Tololing, I think it was a Tololing sortie in which the Mirage 2000 were firing their laser-guided bombs to destroy those 7 or 8 tents right on top of the hill. And that was a very major target for us because it was a stronghold of the Pakistanis that was supposed to be destroyed. So Chief was there at Srinagar airfield and he says, take me in a trainer. So then an additional aircraft was flown. There was a 2-aircraft mission going. So the 3rd aircraft also took off in a trainer aircraft. So there are 2 pilots in the trainer aircraft. One was the chief and one was the captain. And he flew alongside the formation which was going to go and bomb. However, on that particular day, because of the clouding, they could not laze the target. The laser could not be used against the target, and the mission came back without firing the bombs. They repeated the mission later, and then they sorted out the people.
Okay. So the question from Shweta ji is, and I'll read you the question. She wants me to read it.
Right.
Do you ever look back and regret being part of the war and ever think that all could have been avoided? Or do you feel good about being part of the war?
Firstly, I was a child when in 1971.
Right.
Okay. During 1999, I was deployed somewhere and I was doing my part of fighting the war. And I was not in the north where the actual bullets were flying. I was doing something else. So my war experiences with the United Nations in Congo and to some extent inside India, the Naxal operations where I have been, where I have seen a little bit of operations. So yes, war is what are armies for? Armies are not to fight war. Armies are there to prevent war from happening, prevent conflict. So she's absolutely right by saying that when you look back, every war can be avoided by various means, diplomatic or otherwise. Whole lot of things can be done to prevent unnecessary loss of human lives, as well as so much of losses take place on both sides. It's not that only the side which wins wins everything. It is not like old time when you capture territory and capture human being and keep it for yourself for the rest of your lives. So, after war, everything is returned back. So I mean, everybody loses. War is never won, actually, I feel. So she's right by saying that. Yes.
Okay. So let me take a little detour here into two things you mentioned. And as I always tell my guests, new questions come up as we listen to you explain things. You talked about the United Nations contingent of India in Congo. Most people don't realize that the first Paramveer Chakra of independent India was given to an officer who died in Congo as part of the Indian contingent that was sent by the UN. Why is there so much lack of awareness about sort of that part of Indian history among the average Indian?
Well, firstly, it was Lieutenant Arun Khetrapal who was killed in action in Congo. Now, in Congo, I have written about a large amount of articles on the Congo, also about my war experiences of Congo, and in which I say that we were fighting a war which was not a war in the true spirit. It was between two belligerents fighting within their own side, and we were getting involved in it, and some people were getting killed. So we were trying to prevent these two groups from fighting with each other, but we got embroiled in fighting. So in 1962, when Khetrapal actually the operations were taking place, that was the first time that the Indian contingent went with the Canberra aircraft. That was a bomber. We had taken our bombers into Congo, and we were trying to sort out a small little air force, 3, 4, 5 planes that those guys had. And so during this fight, we lost Arun Khetrapal, and a few more, of course, also died alongside him. So there was some fierce fighting that the Indians got into that time. And things over time, when the United Nations, when it operates under Chapter 7, that is the use of force, things have changed over time. Like when we went to Congo and when we fought the militants and the militancy there, our hands were kind of tied. We were not allowed to fire as such till such time we were threatened. Right? It only happened once or twice when I had to open fire and kill people in Congo, because they were becoming a big threat to our survival over there. So the UN headquarters was very, very clear about when to allow us to get into a conflict situation as far as firing a weapon is concerned. Otherwise, we were always flying there trying to sort out, prevent them from fighting each other.
Now, Nitinji, you mentioned about Arun Khetrapal, but wasn't the first Indian Gurbachan Singh Salaria? He was an NDA alumnus. What didn't he win?
Sorry. Gurbachan Singh Salaria, my fault. Salaria Square in India, in fact, is named after my fault. Arun Khetrapal. Sorry, I'm sorry. Arun Khetrapal was in 1971. I got mixed up. Sorry, I'm extremely sorry. I just got mixed up in the name. It was this guy who was there, and just change the name. And that's the story. Sorry.
Yeah. So I guess my big question is, why is there so much lack of awareness? Like, that's a very sort of inspiring story about what Indians did in the Congo. The UN chief died actually, right, in the Congo war at that time, the head of the UN. Yes. So it wasn't like a minor skirmish, right? It was a big deal. But
that time it was, yes. It had gone out of hand. It had gone out of hand completely. So the history again has not been recorded. If you scroll the internet on the sites, you will find the Congo battles being written about. what we did in Congo, there is a mention of this small story, but the actual stories of what was happening behind the scenes, how the UN was reacting, how New York was controlling things. Those stories will take time for them to come out. People have not really. Some things have been written, some things are still under wraps. There are a whole lot of things which, with like the army, our own army was there. What was happening was, I'll just tell you an example to set things right. The Indians were the only guys who were actually fighting weapon. The Pakistanis were guarding, some places, some gold mines and some uranium mines. Americans were also doing that. The Chinese forces were only into building. They're building roads, they're building infrastructure for the Congo. So everybody had their own interest. Only the Indians were fighting. And if you see the history of how many people have been have lost their lives in Congo, you'll see a large number of Indians who have fought and lost their lives. Whereas the other forces, in fact, I can say, I've seen it for myself, that when the Pakistanis used to get firing into firefight, they used to withdraw and they used to ask us to come in and kind of save them. So people have not got into the skirmish situation after that, in the Congo.
That would be an interesting chapter for someone to write about, right? The Pakistanis coming under fire and asking the Indians to intervene and save them. That would make for a good story.
Yes, of course. Yeah, out there, we all fought alongside each other. I mean, we used to fly in Pakistan. I have flown in a Pakistani aircraft, Pakistani Air Force aircraft over there. They were all UN troops. So you all are wearing the same uniform. So things were different. We were not kind of fighting with each other.
So the other thing you mentioned is your involvement in Naxal operations. And I know we are taking a little detour from the book here, but I did want to ask you this. A lot of books are now coming out from senior police people who've been involved sort of in anti-Naxalite operations. And there are interviews available on YouTube about authors from the police forces who've been involved. Now, what about the army side? I've not seen a book from the army side in terms of anti-Naxalite operations. Could you shed some light on that?
The Air Force moved in first. It was the 9th of October, 2009, if I'm not wrong, 2009, yes. When we moved in the first aircrafts into that area, and we moved in to support the police forces. The Indian Air Force moved in to support the police forces in their work. They didn't have the wherewithal to fly around that countryside. I mean, it takes time for people to deploy there. So the Air Force was being used, the helicopters were being used to take wherewithal from one place to the other, rescue people from where things were going wrong. The army moved in a little later. They formed up something called the Jharkhand Chhattisgarh area was formed over there under a brigadier first, and then they were not directly used ever to fight the Naxals. They were used for training our own guys. Our own police forces needed to be trained. They needed to provide protection to vital areas and vital points within the state of Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand. So they were used for these kind of things, but not really into fighting the Naxals as such. You see, because we have had a bad time in the Northeast when the army was used against our own guys. So I think the government did a good thing by not allowing, getting into firefights with these guys.
And many of the audience that might watch this video on YouTube in the future might be lay people who don't understand this. But is it correct to say that the army should not be involved in domestic operations as far as possible? Is that
absolutely? Yes. One of the things that military operations other than war, Mutao it's called, the army gets involved in things like tsunami relief or getting a train accident happens, they go and help out people. Other than that, when militancy in Kashmir against the militancy, a large amount of deployment has taken place, a large amount of skirmishes take place. In the Northeast also, the army is deployed to maintain law and order as much as possible. Because our police forces, I don't think they have the wherewithal or the training or the numbers to kind of, when it goes out of hand, to get the situation under control. So I think for internal security duties, the army must be used when the situation goes out of hand or is likely to go out of hand. But more than that, I think the police forces and the paramilitary forces are there. Now we've got enough number of paramilitary forces to take charge of the situation and get things done.
Okay. So Nitinji, there's a question from Madhu Rot. And her question is, and she's typed this question here, so I'll read this question for you. She's an artificial intelligence engineer. How much impact does technology in terms of software, hardware had on these wars, 1971, 1999, and maybe others? Is there any way artificial intelligence engineers can directly sort of support the armed forces?
One word answer, 100%. 100%. AI is coming in a big way in technology being used in the armed forces. Example is, we are just the drone warfare that is happening. The drones are being used for transporting even small weapons from one place to the other, carrying out recce's, so a whole lot of AI is required to be kind of utilized for things like these. So I think the future wars are going to be fought, not hand-to-hand combat, or the distance between forces will keep increasing, and we'll be fighting the war, war of attrition just on the computer, or maybe using a drone. In fact, the fighters also will slowly kind of take a back seat. We'll have the drones going and kind of delivering the weapons, destruction in case they have to. So the intelligence warfare, the information warfare, all that will take place with the click of a button, sitting in your homes, maybe. So the war of the future is not going to be a war of attrition of human beings, but more to do with capacity and capability.
Okay. So let me ask you my next question. Your book came out. What was the reception to the book? And among those with combat experience, armed forces people like yourself, and among the lay audience, how did people react? Was it what you expected?
By and large, I think the response has been more than what I had thought it would be. Firstly, because I thought that the army guys and the the Air Force guys and people who have worn their uniform earlier, they might just say, "Yeah, we know it all. We will not like to see what you've written." But since it was the stories were slightly different, not normal war stories as such. So I think the acceptance within the armed forces Janata was quite good, if I may say that. And of course, on the civilian side, the kind of reviews that I've got from some people, a doctor in the south somewhere, he read my book and then he wrote a long letter to me saying that how happy was he to understand certain nuances of war fighting through the story that I have written. So those were my kind of gifts and presents that I got from people. I think it's been received pretty well. I'm quite happy with the way it has been produced. The product itself by my publishers, Renu Paul was here, I think she's here, and Vitasta Publishing. They've done a damn good job of the book. So hopefully we should be able to get across more number of people in times to come.
So I think this question is from one of your co-students in the past. And his question is, and he asked me to read it. I invited him to ask on camera, but he asked me to read the question. He said, are you also thinking of writing any book on your alma mater, that is the military training institute that prepares the officers, NDA, which has celebrated 75 years of its raising recently? This is from Chiradeep Mitra.
If you go into I have written a book called Born to Fly, again by Vitasta Publishing, and in that, a major about 60 odd pages of that book is dedicated to the National Defense Academy, about the little things about training, the fun, the frolic, the ragda, all that happens behind the scenes, ahead, jumping from a 7-meter board into the pool, riding a horse for the first time, everything about training I have kind of captured in that in the first 60 pages of the book that I wrote long back. So not really, I'm not planning to write something on the academy because a hell of a lot of things have been written about training in the national defense. So yes, there are a whole lot of books that are available. My book also gets some little stories to make it interesting and to make a person realize how a boy from a country, from a small village, is turned into a soldier at the National Defense Academy. So that's how I have kind of written that part in my book. I have no plans to write about the National Defense Academy already.
And is it only boys or are girls now also?
Yeah, girls have just started. This is the second course which will join now. 19 girls have joined the National Defense Academy in the first course, and now the strength will go up as years go by. At the moment, it is just a start to getting the ladies at the academy, and of course, we'll see what the product comes out after 3 years. It's just the first 6 months have gone by now.
And do you foresee human interest stories and sort of what the experiences that these young girls had at the NDA?
I'm 100% sure that they'll have stories to tell, and people will be really willing to kind of hear them at whatever cost. But I don't think they'll be allowed to talk about it for some time.
Okay.
You will only get some positive, nice ones, curated ones, if I may call them.
But that's sort of global, right? I mean, that's not just India.
That's correct also. Why should things are at the moment in the very nascent stage, let it just catch up, let it stabilize. The system is not stabilizing.
Right.
There will be a lot of things.
Before we get to another question from the audience, let me ask you another question that I have. The film industry in India has made movies like Border or Sher Shah, and those movies have generally been sort of well received by the audience. But do you think they've done an adequate job of covering our military history? What thoughts do you have for those who make films based on India's war history?
A big no. Why? It's not their fault. It is because what the filmmaker makes it for money, and the filmmaker makes things what the audience wants to see. So he keeps that in mind and then makes movies. And so therefore, when it comes to making a war movie or like Border, they have to have a song and dance. They have to have some romance going on the side. They have to have, things not working out completely. So they have to kind of animate things to such an extent to make people realize that, when things go wrong, they do go wrong very badly. Having said that, the stories that come out in this kind of in the movie like Border, for example, you take Border, you will not get the correct picture of what happened. For example, Longewala. The Battle of Longewala was won by the Indian Air Force alone, actually. But then they had to show some army, this thing going in. They had to show a lot of things happening on ground. So things get distorted, and history is not really replicated in India, in Indian movies at least. Some Second World War movies are quite close to the truth, which we can talk about, but not the ones which you're talking about, the examples that you gave.
Okay. Now, there's a question from Mubarak Ali, and I find the question very interesting. How did you imagine IEF life before you joined, and how did your perceptions change after serving?
Okay. What are some of the things that you remember?
Is there someone you served with at the IAF, in the IAF that you remember fondly? I'm sure there are many, but can you tell us about one specific person?
Oh, that's a very interesting question, Mr. Mubarak Ali. I had only seen army life. My father was in the army, so I had only seen the army life when I joined. And Air Force was alien to me. Air Force was completely alien to me. I never knew what. But armed forces, by and large, are similar because way of life is quite similar. And I always had stars in my eyes about joining the armed forces, not because I just wanted to fly. Actually, hell bent on becoming a pilot. So when I became a pilot, so that was kind of the biggest achievement that I always wanted. Uh, but no changes in perception, no. But when you actually start serving inside the Air Force, you come to know so many more things about how things run, how things are done, and how things are not done. So those things you come to know when you become part of the service, you become part of the system, and so you are the system yourself, and you take it forward as you keep going higher in service. You get more and more. There are more people that you can engage with. There are more people you can change. There are more people you can control and change things the way you perceive or you want to. But of course, there's a hierarchy of things. There are command and control structures. You can't, go around saying that I've become a boss of a base. I can do whatever I feel like. Even the chief of air staff cannot do whatever he feels like. So therefore, there is no perception change as such, if I may say that. And then, of course, adapting to IAF life. Well, flying is serious business, and one has to be on the ball all the time, whether it be mentally or on ground when you have to prepare tomorrow's mission. If I have to fly tomorrow, I'll spend the whole evening making my maps. I'll go over my checks. I'll go over my procedures. I'll imagine where I'm going. I'll run through the whole thing in my mind all the time. So it requires a lot of preparation, a lot of hard work that goes behind every mission that is formed. So that is one thing that I learned on the trot, of course, when I joined the Air Force. And therefore, this adapting to this new environment, the third dimension, as I would call it, where everything moves in all directions. So to adapting to that was, yes, a different, in the initial part, one felt, being in the air was like alien. But later on, once you get used to it, it becomes second nature. And then you're there, you're doing your things that you're supposed to do. And then, of course, then he says, is there someone you serve with that you remember fondly? You always remember your first flight commander because he's like a father. My first flight commander was a gentleman called Wing Commander Upadhyay, Group Captain Upadhyay. He's retired. He's in Delhi. I'm in touch with him. He was like a father to us, and we were like, what, 1 year service or just about a few months service when we joined there. We didn't know, ask for my elbow as I put it. So he was the one who actually nurtured us into. He taught us how to write a letter. He taught us how to go approach a sortie. He told us how to prepare for a sortie. And he showed us things by just his own. I'll give you an example. I was going for a mission in the morning, and it was first light before the sun came up. I had to get airborne. It was almost dark when I got airborne. And our man, he was so considerate. He knew, when after a 2-hour flight, when I landed at the forward base where I was going to, he had quietly put one thermos flask of tea and some sandwiches for us under the seats of the helicopter, so that we would not go hungry for the rest of the sortie. So that is the kind of thinking, that we were taught at a very young age, that, as a leader, you need to think about all the small aspects of things.
So this perception we have of army officers, military officers, Air Force officers only commanding, it's not just command, it's also nurturing the younger officers.
Absolutely. If you don't do that, then how do you get the new breed and the new lot of commanders coming up? So nurturing is one of the very, very important aspects of soldiering. And I think the Indian Army does a damn good job of, armed forces rather, do a damn good job of nurturing our youngsters. And we are very good at it because we are human. Our connections are not mechanical as some armies that I have seen. Our connections are more at the human level, and the human touch is never forgotten. So that's why we are much better off as an armed force.
Okay. So Nitinji, we are getting close to time. So let me wrap up, ask the last few questions and we then finish it. You mentioned that the book took you 1 year to write. How did you keep yourself on track and motivated during this time? These days, attention span of people is barely few minutes, if not, if days.
I'm a retired guy now. I have got something nice to do. I'm training people for armed forces only. So this was learning for me also. I'm at the moment training young boys to join the NDA. So it was learning for me also, firstly. Secondly, each story that I was doing, I was like, it was kind of hitting me in my face. I had never thought that, I would ever come across people who would tell me such intricate stories. There's the story about this prisoner of war, one Air Commodore I met here, who told me how he was treated in Pakistan, how he went on a camel and what all happened to him in his long journey in Pakistan. So I never thought that these kind of stories existed for that matter. So it was a learning for me. I was very interested in doing it. I found it, I had a catharsis. I mean, I really enjoyed every moment of writing this book because it came from people's hearts.
Yeah, I remember reading that story in your book, and I thought someday if an OTT series is made on this book, then that story will get a lot of attention because that's an interesting story. But tell me this, as a writer, not as an Air Force person, but as a writer, who inspired you? What are any senior writers who inspired you?
Not senior writer, yes. Rustin Bond is one person I really, really admire. I read everything that he writes, and I had the opportunity of going and sitting in his house and speaking to him. And I gifted him my first book also.
In Shimla?
No, he's in Missouri.
Missouri, yes. Sorry.
Yeah, in Missouri. So it was beautiful to meet him, and the way he thinks, the way he goes about description of a particular thing. And that was the one thing that I kind of tried to learn from his writings. And what happened was that when I had to write about the tsunami, when I had to write about the tsunami of 2004, I had to make the person, kind of feel the wave of water hitting him. So I think this is what I learned from the people that I read books from in my earlier times. Enid Blyton se lekar, I mean, all kinds of people that in the younger time when you used to read books. Aajkal people don't really read much, but we used to kind of keep reading. So I think the way things have to be described, I found my own little way of doing it, and I quite loved the way I used to, kind of describe things in my stories.
And any interesting books you are reading these days?
Well, I am reading. I'm reading about the 1962 debacle. It's a very old book, so I'm reading about that. And other than that, I'm also reading another book which is about India's wars by Arjun Subramaniam. So he's an Air Force officer who writes very beautifully. So Arjun sir he was my kind of senior, and we served together in the same place long back. So I'm trying to read about India's wars from his book. Yes.
So Nitinji, when I told people about this upcoming talk that we were going to have, many people brought up the 1962 war, and I feel like the 1962 war and whatever lessons we could have learned has somehow got lost in the politics of the day. Do you see any good book on the 1962 war that you would recommend to the average person to read?
62.
You said you are reading something about that too, right? An old
book. 62 war. The book that has been written by what's this guy's name? The cricketer's his son was a very famous cricketer, Dalby. Michael Dalby's. I met Michael Dalby for an interview a few months ago, and he's the guy who gifted me this book. I knew about the book, of course, about 1962, about his father, Colonel Dalby, but I never got around to reading it. So now I'm kind of going through it with a tooth comb and trying to see what all went through there. I've just started doing it. I'm not really very clear about 1962. In fact, there is one of my gurus who has just joined in here, Unni Kartha sir is here, and he's an amazing historian. He has everything on the back of his hands, as far as 1971 is concerned, 71 and whatever the wars that India has fought of late. So it's
Okay.
amazing.
So let me ask you my next question. And again, I have a whole list of more questions I want to ask and I want to learn from you, but we are pressed for time. So let me ask you the last question. And I will combine my last question with a question from Chiradeep Mitra, which is related to my last question. What is the next book you're working on? And do you plan to write a book for corporates, sort of taking your IAF experience and then translating into sort of lessons for business and corporate people?
Okay. I'll answer the second part first. My learning from the tsunami on leadership and management. What I wrote about the tsunami was, it was called A Few Good Men and the Angry Sea. So it was a descriptive book about what happened, what we did, how the islands were brought back to normalcy. What I'm trying to do now is to kind of write something about management and leadership theories, which are applicable from the armed forces onto the corporate by way of examples from what I learned in the tsunami. So the script is almost ready, and it should be done in about a month's time, I think. But before, and as we speak, one of my short story books has just gone to the publishers now. I've not named it as yet. And it has stories about Congo, it has stories about Air Force, small, little snippets about little missions that were done, rescue missions, and a whole lot of things that I got to experience in the Air Force. So that short story book will be out maybe another couple of months, 2 months, 3 months, or whatever time it takes for publishing.
And you said it is yet unnamed?
Yeah, I have not kind of thought of a name for it, but eventually I think we'll come to something because they're short stories. So I didn't know what to, kind of put it across, because the last short story book that I wrote was, it was called Up in the Sky, Helicopter Stories. This is the book, Up in the Sky, Helicopter Stories, that I wrote. But I think I'll change. I'll put it as something else now. Let's see what happens. About 20 odd short stories. And this time I have kind of, I've got a poet friend who's given a poetry on each of these short stories. So it's going to be a little different kind of a book that's going to come out.
So Nitinji, we look forward to reading your next book as well as Up in the Sky, which you just shared with us. On that note, thank you very much for your time. And I totally appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you for the audience. Lovely talking to you all. And it's been a lovely evening for me too.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Until next time, when we meet with another author, another book, thank you for joining us, and good day, Nitinji.
Thank you. Thank you. Jai Hind.
Jai Hind.